Let's just remind people that as they join, if they could respond to the poll that should be on your screen.
And if you can't see the poll, you should have a button under either more or just next to your chat where you can click on polls and it will pop up if you have just come in the room.
Yeah, we now have 67 people in. And Sue, I don't know how many votes you see on your side. Yeah, people are voting rapidly. So
Cool.
we'll just add 5 on to for many years.
Well, welcome everyone. We had over 450 registrations for this debate, so we are expecting more people to come in, but we do want to keep it very much on time and within the structure of a debate. So thank you all for joining us and for your interest in the first debate in our wildlife economy debate series. And each debate is going to focus on a different wildlife economy topic or activity. And this one is obviously going to be focusing on hunting, but only on one small aspect of hunting related to trophy hunting. Just to raise awareness that there are many forms of hunting. There's recreational hunting, there's subsistence hunting, there's sport fishing, and all different forms of hunting. But this particular debate will be focusing on trophy hunting. And just in terms of the purpose of why we started this debate series, is really to engender objective discussion and debate around different wildlife economy topics to provide different perspectives that will contribute to our knowledge of the value of the wildlife economy in Africa. So it's very much about bringing to attention the different perspectives on different very topical issues within the wildlife economy. Just some rules quickly. The audience will remain on mute throughout the debate. Comments and questions should please be put in the chat and should be constructive and based on fact and science, not emotive. Please do use 3 question marks in front if it's a question to differentiate it from a comment, just so that we can pull those out. And anyone found disrupting the debate will be removed. We really do want to keep this academic and based on fact and science. In terms of the format of the debate, welcome everyone. We've already done the welcome. Holly will be doing an introduction, and we will be doing the first vote or poll. So as in a formal debate, we will have a poll to assess opinions, and then we will move on to the scientific academic presentation of the opposing points of view that Amy and Hans will present for 10 minutes each. Then we will have structured Q&A with our experts, and then we will have audience Q&A and the second vote or poll. So please do stay right until the end to make sure that you can participate in both polls. I will now hand over to our moderator for today, Dr. Holly Dublin. Thank you, Holly.
Okay, so Sue had up there very briefly what the format was going to be, so that you know that we are going to move through different parts of this. And I'll start with the beginning, which is to make sure that everybody's on the correct debate and the correct Zoom link. If you're here to hear a debate on whether or not the UK should ban the importation of hunting trophies. And I just want to focus, our participants just for a moment on that, so that you're very clear that this is not a debate about trophy hunting. The debating topic is in front of you here. And I'm going to give just a bit of context here. I did notice in the entry poll that we were in a situation where probably many people, maybe like myself, are somewhat old hacks in this and have been in this debate for a very long time. This is not the first time they've heard about it, and it's not the first time they've heard about hunting, the banning of hunting trophies. But this is focusing on the UK, and I just want to, for our audience, make sure that people know a bit about the history. So sometime in 2021, a bill was brought forward in the UK called the Animals Abroad Bill. And that bill was a part of the Animal Welfare Action Plan that the government had proposed to tackle animal cruelty and support conservation efforts overseas. So that bill included bans on the trade in hunting trophies that threaten the conservation status of species abroad, domestic sale and advertising of such experiences overseas, and things like elephant rides that were perceived as being cruel to animals. So there have been sessions on that. A formal meeting session, which was an oral evidence presentation, was held in November, on the 2nd of November, 2021. And then there was also a very long period where written evidence was submitted, and I believe very extensive written evidence was submitted. But the long and short of it was that by the 10th of May, 2022, the bill was abandoned. And there are many reasons behind that, which are not important for this debate. But that was not the end of it, obviously. So where we then moved to was two private members' bills were put forward, hunting trophies, so the import of the prohibition of importation. The long title being a bill to make provision prohibiting the import of hunting trophies in Great Britain, so into Great Britain. So there were two membered bills, one by John Speller and another by Henry Smith. They originated in the House of Commons in the 2022-2023 session. The first reading took place on the 15th of June, 2022, and the second reading is scheduled for tomorrow. So this is actually very timely. The bill being debated tomorrow is Henry Smith's bill. He's up in the Conservative Party. There seems to be some lack of likelihood that John Speller's bill will be debated. So I just wanted to put you into that reality. So that tells you where we are sitting right now with these bills and what this is all about. Okay, so I want to now go on, please, to the next slide. So we needed to, as a group here, decide what definition we wanted to use, because there are many definitions out there. And this, what you see up on the screen, should not be accepted as this is the world's accepted definition. This is the definition that was accepted by this group. So you can read it, but it is the legal hunting, primarily for recreation, where hunters pay to hunt individuals with particular qualities such as horn length or body size, and may retain all or part of a hunted animal as a hunting trophy. The primary purpose of the hunt is not for meat, although the meat may well be consumed. So I hope everybody is clear, and we're not having a debate on that definition. So that's the definition that we signed up to. So now I want to take the opportunity to introduce you to our two proponents today, our proponent favoring the bill and our proponent opposing. And I believe you'll have up in the chat a link so that you can read more about our two wonderful speakers who are both dear friends of mine for a long time. And I'm very happy to introduce them to you. So Hans Bauer is a conservation scientist with over 30 years of experience specializing on the northern lion of West, Central, and Northeast Africa. And Hans is a research fellow at the University of Oxford's Wildcru. So he's a part of that and a contributor. Hans, at the request of the all-party parliamentary group against trophy hunting, privately gave spoken testimony, and he subsequently worked that testimony into an article in The Conversation on the 29th of June, 2022. So you can all get access to that and read them if you have not already. And our other proponent, well, the negative proponent, Professor Amy Dickman. Amy is a professor of wildlife conservation at Oxford University, where she is the director of Wildcru, the Wildlife Conservation Research Unit. And Amy is also the joint CEO of Lion Landscapes and the chair of the board of the Arabian Leopard Fund. Just to say that, of course, Amy and Hans also very involved with many other things, but Amy's contribution to the open call for evidence for the Animals Abroad bill, she did as the joint CEO of Lion Landscapes and provided a written submission. Amy then also took the opportunity to respond to Hans's article in The Conversation, and she did so on the 10th of August, 2022. So many of you will have already seen this. So I'm going to now go to giving you the main debating point. And I think a next poll is going up now because we want to find out your positions on should the UK ban the importation of hunting trophies, the evidence for and against. And I want to point out that we will be having Hans go first. He will be followed by Amy, And this is not because there's any bias whatsoever. We've taken this from debating rules, which is that the argument for goes forward first, and then the argument against follows that. So we have agreement among all of us that that is the way things proceed. So while that poll is going on, I'm going to now turn over, Hans, to you to provide the evidence for the UK ban on the importation of hunting trophies. Thanks, Hans. Over to you.
Thank you, Holly. I hope everyone can hear me. I'm going to share my screen. I hope that works. Okay. Are we all set? Okay. Well, Amy is used to trophy hunting debates on the grounds of ethics, and I won't go there today. So if I lose this debate, she will still have to win that other debate with other people. Amy has a great theory, but it doesn't work. Long ago, I also believed that trophy hunting was for the greater good, and maybe it was then, but now trophy hunting is of net negative consequence. Let's see the lion range map. And first black out the countries without trophy hunting. Now, there's mixed evidence from Namibia and Botswana, but let's assume that trophy hunting works for the people and wildlife of those countries and make them green. Then to the amber category of countries with mixed results. South Africa has great achievements, but according to the USA, there is no enhancement. Zimbabwe and Mozambique have functional hunting zones, but overall wildlife in these countries is challenged. On to the red category, countries with very limited success, echoed in their lion trends. Hunting zones in Zambia and Tanzania are being abandoned. Ethiopia no longer has a single lion on quota. Lions have disappeared from half of the hunting zones of Cameroon, and in Burkina Faso, lion hunting quota were the highest in Africa for 30 years on end, but now the population has collapsed. The most striking case is Central African Republic, half of which was designated as hunting zones, none of which have much wildlife today. Not because the hunters killed everything, but because their money did nothing for people or against poaching. With rising threats come rising management costs, and in most of Africa, wildlife cannot pay its way through trophy hunting. I can tell you many stories about the problems with quota setting and governance, and about declining wildlife populations and non-existing community benefits. So do ask me in question time as I move on to this one. Does it benefit people? Here are the demographics showing how weak the community benefits argument is. And that is assuming that Namibia and Botswana are also green in this respect. And I'm not so sure. People in conservancies undeniably have benefits, but they're not doing much better than their neighbors. They're not suddenly rich or even middle class. So is trophy hunting about lifting people out of poverty or keeping them in it? In the WAP complex of West Africa, trophy hunting occupied half the area and generated 2% of the management budget. In Cameroon, benefits amount to $1 per person per year. In Tanzania, there was no evidence of poverty reduction in the wildlife management areas. Trophy hunting has been tried and tested, and overall it has failed. There are well-managed hunting zones. The theory can work, but on balance, it is ineffective for the majority of African ecosystem, but also for the vast majority of African people. The narrative that this is a discussion about rural development across the continent is overwhelmingly false. The threat of trophy hunting does not just apply to the animals it kills, but to the fact that it poorly manages X million square kilometers of wild land. Amy's piece in The Conversation is sleepwalking us into losing lots of lions while keeping communities in poverty, and is supporting a territorial monopoly by a small elite to enable them to practice their sick sport. It claims there are no alternatives and continues to play the violin on the Titanic. The honest truth is that on a lot of the trophy hunting estate, dangerous wildlife will disappear, and an end to trophy hunting can indeed accelerate that. But for another part of that estate, wildlife is doomed under trophy hunting, whereas other organizations could raise the resources for proper management and proper benefits if they had access. And yet other parts are in fact already conserved for reasons unrelated to the fictitious benefits of trophy hunting. The Titanic has lifeboats, but the captain has to deploy them. There is no such thing as a blanket global hunting ban. There is no worldwide authority that can proclaim and enforce such a ban. Sovereign countries can ban trophy hunting in their own jurisdictions. They can also restrict or ban the import of trophies into their jurisdictions, which France, Australia, and the Netherlands have done. Finally, the Conference of Parties to CITES can restrict international trade in trophies. Those are the three instruments we have at our disposal. The UK is a democracy where a majority of the people want legislation that bans the import of trophies from threatened species, and I have no arguments against it. In this poll, people did not seem to care whether the species is threatened. Amy prefers this SULI poll with complicated questions that introduce propositions on benefit, which increases the blanks and pushes the support below 50%. Worse, it has untrue propositions about benefits. It's like asking if people would play in a lottery if they would win all the time. But even in this poll, the number of people in favor of a ban is higher than the number of people against it. Is that unfair to Namibia and Botswana? I don't think so. Domestic policy affects international trade all the time. Voters, and therefore politicians, care about human rights in China, workers' rights in Qatar, women's rights in Iran, and animal rights in Botswana. Now, remember, an import ban is the only instrument that the UK has to express the concerns of its citizens. And note that the UK only proposes to use it for threatened species. The upside for the minority is, if Namibia and Botswana find trophy hunting useful, the UK ban will hardly affect them, but they too would be wise to see the direction of travel of global demand in the tourism industry. Campaigners may lobby countries to stop trophy hunting, and you can like that or not, but that is not what this legislation does. I work in countries where civil society is severely restricted. I know that Amy gets really annoyed with campaigners, but I can only say, count your blessings. What campaigners say is noise. What matters are the facts and the policies. And the policies now proposed by the UK, to me, appear reasonable, and I expect Parliament will adopt them. They push an unavoidable transition, which is not a jump in the deep end, but a swim to the shallow end. Within Wildcrew, Amy is among the people doing most work on creating alternatives, and I'm happy to work with her. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Hans. And I'm going to turn over immediately to you, Amy, to provide your retort.
I'm muted. Sorry, I think you would have got over that after like years of COVID. Thank you very much, Hans. That was great. Can everyone hear me and see the screen? Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
Good. Great. Well, thanks for that. That was a really useful start to it. But I'm obviously going to argue the other way about why the UK shouldn't ban the import of hunting trophies. It's a huge topic to cover in 10 minutes. So I'm going to look at what the justifications might be for that ban and then say where I think they're not justified. So, for example, is there a moral justification for the import ban being proposed by the UK? Is this a case where we just find in the UK that this is such a repugnant sort of sport and such a repugnant thing to do that it shouldn't be allowed that hunters bring those trophies back in? Is it the case actually that the UK is morally opposed to killing wild animals? Now, that doesn't seem to be the case, including even protected species. So, for example, the UK have killed over 100,000 badgers since 2013, again, often going against the best science. And this is nominally to protect, to stop cattle transmission and TB spread. But obviously that killing isn't for fun. So what does the UK think about recreational killing? Is that something that, again, we're really against here? It doesn't seem that way either. So if you look at this report from the government in 2018, they were celebrating the fact that recreational angling was putting 1.4 billion into the English economy. Worth noting that's only 0.07% of the English GDP. They were talking about the importance of that both societally and economically. So as you'll see here, they highlight the importance to some of England's regional economies and mention the fact that the income from those fishing licenses is used to fund the work to protect and improve fish stocks, fisheries, improve habitats and tackle illegal fishing. All the same sort of things that we talk about in the trophy hunting debate. And it's actually being actively encouraged. Here you'll see they're focused on protecting and growing angling for the economy and for society as a whole. This is despite the fact that if you look at the pictures of angling, it's not that dissimilar to the pictures you see from trophy hunters. Again, people showing off the animals that they've caught in this way. But this isn't something that's being pushed against by the government. In fact, there's a new recent national angling strategy to get more people fishing. So they talk about the health and the well-being aspects of this, and they say they're developing an exciting vision for growing the sport. So clearly we're not against recreational killing of animals, and it's something the government's actually investing in. What about then recreational killing that might cause ecological harm? We don't seem against that either. So more than 30 million pheasants are released every year. And that's also, this is for sport hunting, this is also not decreasing over time. It's up 900% since the 1960s. But okay, what about just trophy hunting? Is it the fact that it's just something so awful about watching a hunter gloat over the body of a dead mammal that really repels us? And that's what we're really annoyed about. That doesn't seem the case either. Tens of thousands of animals are trophy hunted in Britain each year. For instance, we export, on best estimates, probably around something like 30,000 red deer every year. So we export far more animals than we import. So to me, this doesn't seem as if there's a moral justification for a ban on imports. But obviously people will say, well, red deer are very different from rhinos and lions, and this is really about conservation. So is there a conservation justification for the ban being proposed? Certainly, this is a clear conservation aim. The government has stated the ban will protect around 7,000 species, nearly 7,000 species. No one seems to be able to actually explain how that will happen, but it's clear in this press release that it's part of a wider drive on international conservation. The text released last night talks again about this being part of international action to protect endangered species. So conservation is put at the heart of it. Now, yesterday they talked about the species that would be affected, the different annexes, and this seems to relate to around 5,800 animal species. Again, not quite nearly 7,000, but interestingly, that includes over 2,000 species of cnidarians. These are things like corals and hydra and jellyfish, 1,500 species of birds, mainly small ones, and many other species, 95 species of mollusks, 69 bats, 58 species of moths, 42 species of spiders and scorpions. It is very unclear to me, and I await elucidation on it, on how this trophy hunting ban is going to improve the conservation of these species. Now, it's really true that poorly managed trophy hunting can harm some populations. That's clear. It's been shown for lions and other species. But also really important to recognise, and this goes against a lot of the narratives in this debate, that it is not a key threat to any species. We've looked extensively at this, looking at species that are the most exported, the most threatened on the red list, those which mention sport hunting in the red list categories. There are 117 species that we've collated from that. There is no mention of trophy hunting in 95% of them. There is mention for 6 species, and that tends to be unclear. It doesn't clear whether it's legal or not, or mixed, for instance, like leopards, where if it's well managed, it could be good, or lions, but if it's poorly managed, it could be negative. And what's really important is not all threats are equal. Trophy hunting can actually help reduce larger threats. What tends to threaten the species that we talk about most in the debate is the loss of habitat. That's the primary threat to biodiversity, poaching and conflict with people. This is a trophy hunting area on the right, and you can see that it is helping prevent against land conversion shown on the left. Not ideally, as Hans was talking about, there's huge amounts of issues in trophy hunting areas, exactly the same as in photographic areas. And I would just note that more land is conserved in Africa, for example, under trophy hunting areas than national parks. And there are clear positive benefits for some species, even endangered ones, even critically endangered, like the black rhino. This shows the trends in black rhino on the bottom from a recent paper. after the introduction of limited hunting, because the revenue incentivizes the maintenance of land under a wildlife-based land use and helps fund things like anti-poaching. So it helps actually reduce the key threats. It's not just about putting a blanket ban on endangered species, about stopping all of that. We have to understand what is causing the endangerment and whether that is trophy hunting, whether trophy hunting is in fact reducing those factors pushing those species to decline. And there are major risks of undermining trophy hunting unless better options are ready, because it would intensify the underfunding. A lot of what Hans was just talking about, they're absolutely true, but a lot of it is because these areas, protected areas, are not well funded. And this would actually make that worse. So it would intensify those threats, and it would be much better if you had regulation or a smart ban rather than the kind of blanket ban being imposed on all species, all threatened and endangered species, which is being proposed here. So there is no conservation justification for the ban being proposed. What about, and Hans touched on this, the democratic justification for the import ban? So we constantly hear, and we heard about that, Hans put up a little bit, from the 9 out of 10 British voters want the ban, but that is based on leading questions. If you unpick those, Hans talked about the fact that, yes, we introduce more complexity, but this is a complex issue. So this was not a leading question under the Sully one. And those more accurate, more nuanced questions do show that fewer than half Britons want the bans if they risk harms. Now, that's not surprising because people care about conservation. They care about wildlife. They care about, they don't want to see animals dying in horrible ways. And it's that kind of passion behind it and that motivation that really should be respected. And critically, if the UK doesn't want trophy hunting, then it should ban it domestically. So why is this ban not in front of the Parliament about banning it domestically? I think that's because actually it's very difficult when it comes up with the realities of your constituents, your economies, and the realities of conservation in your country. And this seems very dismissive just to look at imports. So why is it only imports? Is wildlife management worse elsewhere? Is the UK world leading in this? Certainly not. If we look at the Megafauna Conservation Index, the top 10 countries here, the UK is nowhere. The UK is dwindling down somewhere around 50, I think, or so. And 8 out of those top 10 countries use trophy hunting as part of their wildlife management. That's not necessarily causal. You can have good wildlife management without it, but it shows that the presence of trophy hunting doesn't mean necessarily that you don't have good conservation. And at the very least, there should be a conservation exemption if the public have been told that this is about conservation. If it can be proven that this is good for species in certain cases, then allow those to come in. If not, then this is, if people sort of push against that, it suggests it's much more about ideology than actual conservation. So I don't see a democratic justification for the ban. So why? Is this a necessary opportunity to drive innovative new conservation models, things like bushcraft, that sort of way into those shallower waters or deeper waters? I can't remember Hans' analogy. But no, I think the need for new models is abundantly clear. It is being worked on, as Hans touched on. Every time we see a Living Planet report, we see how wildlife is declining. Lots of people are working on better models. But the truth is there simply is no viable alternative ready at scale. We've both talked about the underfunding. This is for protected areas with lions, and there's already massive underfunding. And this is with photographic, trophy hunting, donor and state funding all combined. So reducing one of those, taking away trophy hunting without a better alternative will only make that worse. And there are huge areas where alternatives could be developed. Whole countries like Kenya, so there's no need to remove trophy hunting to do that. If we have a hasty ban without alternatives, it's likely to lead to major habitat conversion and wildlife loss. And critically, if better alternatives either exist or emerge, there's no need for a ban. No one had to ban the horse and carriage to make way for the car, or ban the letter to make way for the email. They would naturally be replaced over time. So does it all matter? Is the UK import so few trophies? Yes, because the political and public focus on this really risks distracting from and actively worsening real conservation threats. What happens in the UK will be repeated elsewhere and used to push similar bans. And I really think, as with COVID, the government policy should follow the science and not be led by misinformation from lobby groups or celebrities. And there's extensive misinformation in this topic. I think this policy that's put forward ignores the weight of conservation evidence, the complexity of the topic, and the rights and the voices of affected people, all while still continuing hunting at home. So I believe it's a simplistic, harmful policy. It's driven by ideology with major risks and no evident benefits. And that's why I strongly oppose the idea of this ban on banning the import of hunting trophies from the UK. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amy. So thanks, Hans, and thanks, Amy. I think we can see how a debate can be kept very, very much on the basis of scientific evidence, at least how it's presented from both sides, while still understanding the emotion, because I think both of you are quite emotional in your own way. So I want to point out that, emotions are not always bad. They just represent different feelings that people have. So I want to, now I'm going to come on to a series of quite short questions for the two of you. So you're going to have 2 minutes each on these. And I want to also just signal our audience that if you want to put some questions up into the chat, we're going to see if we can get through these fast enough with the time available to provide an opportunity to take some of those questions from you. So I think Amy will probably now reverse the order just for the sake of it. So it could be argued that the importing country should bear some responsibility for the impacts of such bans at the national and local level in the exporting countries. So first of all, do you agree? And if so, how might they compensate for these material impacts? And if not, what alternative sources of income might the importing country help the exporting country to put in place in the short term and the long term? And I'll only just end on that question by saying this is not something very theoretical, because if any of you have been watching the climate debates, you know that climate justice is about this very question. So over to you, Amy, please, 2 minutes.
Thanks, Holly. That's a lot in 2 minutes. So yes, and I think it's really important. The IUCN briefing paper on this says that import bans and other restrictions shouldn't be in place if they undermine or restrict trophy hunting without putting in place multiple steps, including equitable consultation and the identification of fully funded alternatives that offer at least equal or greater conservation benefits. So I definitely think if there is this cost, and we know there's a cost, that it should be borne by the countries who are putting in those restrictions to do it. Because all too often we already see that conservation, the costs are far too unfairly borne by the people living closest to wildlife. I think the mechanisms for that are not well fleshed out, and it's not really mentioned at all, which worries me. So it's not as if the countries are saying, we recognize this will undermine the financial viability and therefore we've got this other mechanism to do it. That would be a much better way forward. I think you could say, people have talked about maybe doing it through aid funding, etc. But the problem is, to me, that creates a lot of dependence. And if you see then shifts in national priorities, as we've seen in the UK with the change in the amount of overseas aid budget we give, for example, then that means that's likely to cut the funding. It's not reliable, it's not sustainable, it's not self-grown. And that's what this should be about, is that countries being able to get to that stage. I think in terms of the future, we can move towards things like biodiversity credits, tokenization approaches. There's lots of novel financial mechanisms that I think would much more fairly recognize the value of biodiversity that's being secured in these places, and the fact the richer countries who've exploited their own biodiversity and other people would need to kind of pay for that and sort of level that playing field and recognize the costs of conservation being unfairly borne. So I think there are mechanisms that are potential. They're not there in place at the moment, and I hope they do deliver on it.
Okay, Amy, we knew you could do it. Hans, do you need me to repeat the question for you, or are you good to go?
No, I'm fine. I have the question. Okay, here we go. 2 minutes. Holly, you asked that question. In the morning, do you have bread or yogurt for breakfast?
Do you really want to know?
Just say any. It's in my
Yogurt.
time. Okay. If you switch from yogurt to bread, are you going to apologize to your dairy farmer? Are you going to compensate your dairy farmer for now wanting to use bread for your breakfast? If Amy says people shouldn't be dependent on foreign aid, people also shouldn't be dependent on artificially creating and maintaining markets. This is a free market where people have to compete. Now, you're saying if this ban has financial consequences. The UK imports roughly 10 lion trophies per year, 5 of which from South Africa, where there is no enhancement. And the other 5 are what, 50, 60,000? Are we really discussing about 50, 60,000 now? The point is, the problem in most of Africa is not a demand problem. It is a supply problem. Tanzania, the abandonment of trophy hunting zones, that is the supply issue. It's unaffected by demand. I have 30 seconds, but I think I've said it all.
Okay, we don't mind picking up time. So I'm going to now reverse the order, and Hans, I'm going to come back to you. And to ask you, just on what technical grounds can an importing country actually justify taking a decision with potentially significant ramifications for the other countries? So they may not be yet explicit, but what are the technical grounds actually for doing that?
Well, every country is sovereign, and the UK has taken, on a daily basis, makes policies that have consequences for other countries. That's international politics. And whether that's for developing countries or for developed countries, that doesn't make a difference. In CITES, there is a provision for stricter domestic measures. That's the technical language. So any party to CITES has to comply with the minimum trade restrictions of CITES, but every party is also free to have their own stricter domestic measures. So that is the response to your question. What is the justification? Technically, it's that provision in CITES.
Okay, Hans, thank you very much. Amy, I'm going to turn over to you.
I mean, to be honest, Holly, I don't think I have much to add to what Hans says, and he's much more an expert in the provisions of CITES, etc. So I think there is the ability within the UK, obviously, to add those stricter domestic provisions, and they seem to be choosing to do so in this case. So I think it's within their remit to do that. Whether that makes it the right thing to do or not is obviously what we're debating now, but I think they certainly are able to do that.
Yeah, the reason I put that question in there is for our audience to understand that they are within their rights within the mandate of CITES, and that stricter domestic legislation happens. And the two of you have been discussing what the potential impacts of that are. Excuse me for having turned off my camera. There's a monkey trying to get into where I am, so apologies on that. So back to the debate, and this is potentially a little bit controversial. Amy, I'm going to come back to you first. So if the tables were turned, this is just in your own view, would it be legitimate for African countries, just as a hypothetical question, to question the conservation impact of domestic decisions in countries of the global north with regard to their use of their natural resources, and both national and international resources? So their own, but for example, their fisheries quotas in international waters, timber harvests from other countries, and how they set their own import quotas around things like that. So would you want to comment on whether you think it would be legitimate for other countries to comment on this, and how might they argue the legitimacy?
Well, I think there are two things here, and they often get conflated together, is that whether we're talking about the imports of things, which is a domestic policy, and deciding what you allow to come into your country, and you can kind of add, as we were talking about, those additional regulations, then that is legitimate to at least ask those questions and make those decisions based on whatever the government, listens to in terms of the debate. Of course, people have lots of views on other things, and of course they can judge other countries, that also happens whether we like it or not. I can absolutely see that. I think in a place like Africa, for example, and unfortunately, it's unfortunate this debate always ends up about Africa. Of course, we're at ALU, but trophy hunting occurs right across the world. So it occurs in Canada and New Zealand and Finland and all sorts of places. So we have to make sure that we don't just make it about Africa. But I think if I was an African, and I'm not, I would probably feel unfair that I, in general, am doing a better job, many of these countries, in maintaining wildlife. And yet someone like the UK, which is extremely nature depleted, is kind of saying the way that for us to advance international conservation is putting these restrictions on it without really bottoming out how exactly that would improve things in those places and address the threat. So I would certainly, I think, feel angry about that if it was undermining the choices that have been made in those countries. But as I talked about, if we're talking about imports, then there is a justification, even with timber, with fish, with other things as well.
Thanks, Amy. Sorry. And now, Hans, just to turn over to you on that one.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. Amy, you started again about trophy hunting inside the UK. That's not what we're discussing today. That's a very different discussion. We're talking about import bans. And while I'm at it, we also agreed that we wouldn't be using cartoons in our PowerPoints, and maybe I would have introduced some of them if we had both not played by the rules. Now to your question, Holly. Your argument has a very good example. SADC is arguing against the UK introducing import bans. That is an argument against a democratic majority of the UK. Is that legitimate? I'm not so sure. If the UK was telling a specific country to stop trophy hunting, now that's an infringement on sovereignty. And maybe that is what SADC is doing by telling the UK to go against the minority. Whereas the UK is not telling any country what to do. It's just restricting imports. It's a domestic UK policy.
So is that the end of your intervention on that? Okay, so I'm actually quite pleased with where we are, and I want to say that you know, this is a short time period. From my own, I think the two of you know me quite well, so I can jump into any debate at any point in time and be on either side of every argument, and because debating is really a very valuable thing. And I think as far as the audience is concerned, people will have heard new things, they will have heard old things, they will have heard different cuts on things. And I think that's really, really important. And that is the purpose of why ALU has decided to host these. So I do want to go now to some questions from our audience. It would be best, let me, have a look. I'm going to have to, because I haven't been tracking. So Sue might need to feed me some of the questions. If there are any. If there aren't, can people put them up? I see one for Hans specifically. I'm just going to go to that while I search through Hans and give this one over to you. How can the UK government ban on the importation of hunting trophies promote conservation action in Africa? And how can this ban benefit local people? So it's quite related to the question that I gave you. It's not identical. So take that one on and I will continue the search.
Okay. Well, I think I touched on that in my presentation, but thank you for giving me 2 minutes to expand. The trophy hunting sector sits on X million hectares of wildland. And what we're seeing is that it's very poorly managed. Many trophy hunting operations are folding, are abandoning their areas because it is not profitable. And so at the moment, no other party has access to that area. No one can, it's a private enterprise, so you can't expect the public to subsidize it or anything. The only way that other parties can get involved in better management of those areas is by stopping the monopoly of access to those areas for trophy hunters. So the short answer is it opens up trophy hunting estate to other parties who might be able to put better management in place.
Okay, thanks very much, Hans. And this next one isn't directed to either of you. I'm going to let Amy take a first crack at it, but feel free, Hans, because we want everybody to have a chance. So in terms of the UK ban on import, although the trophy is an important part of the hunt, would the reality really be that this stops the hunt? And I think this is a very, very interesting question. So therefore, this can be seen as sugarcoating a bigger issue for the UK government to appease a polling sector. So that's like a second part of it. Feel free to, there are two different points there. Feel free to address either or both.
Okay, so I was going first. Yeah. So in terms of would people still go hunting if there wasn't the ability to export the trophy, it just depends on the location, the hunter and everything else. I think many people probably would still go. And there's increasing now, you can see sort of movements towards doing 3D printing of hunting trophies, etc., so that people could still take back a memento of it. Of course, if that's what happened, what you would do just then is reduce the revenue that went locally even further. And if that's something that people are saying is an issue in trophy hunting, then why would you want to reduce the local revenue that goes, through sort of the mounting of the heads or the trophies or whatever? So that, I think it would reduce it, it would undermine it slightly, but it probably wouldn't stop it. And what was the second part about, the greenwashing sort of thing, was that right? Yeah, so I think very much, and that's why I brought up, because I think it is very relevant to the UK. This isn't about the UK not believing in trophy hunting. They seem to believe in it domestically, but they're not believing in it importing them. And that's, I think, because the costs of the import ban are felt externally, whereas the costs of an export ban or banning it at home would be felt domestically. And to me, that very much is relevant to this, because it feels like a greenwashing thing. We say, well, act on this, but we won't do anything that bears kind of penalties at home. And I think that's unfair, basically. But I do apologize about the cartoon. I'd forgotten about that. So yeah, I'm happy to take that.
Okay, in my debating room, we accept apologies, I think, just because we have to go on living and working together. Hans, do you want to take that one on about, what would happen? No, you're good. Okay, there's another one here that's directed to you, Hans, that is a ban on the importation of hunting trophies is a de facto limitation in the amount of trophy hunting by tourists and external hunters in the country. In order for this to not have a negative impact on these countries, what are the structures you believe should be implemented to ensure that land use doesn't turn from private game reserves to agriculture, or so the conservation can be locally funded with stable, reliable financial resources?
Well, that touches upon something that Amy also said, talking about all those species, how is the ban going to help the 600, octopus species and so on. I think that is a result from, the text isn't available yet, but I'm assuming that the legislation defines the criteria for import ban as being endangered or vulnerable. That is threatened. So threatened, that includes lots of species that we're not really interested in here. Now, the deeper question there is, what do we put in place as an alternative? Amy also touched on the fact that photographic tourism isn't the answer always. The issue is photographic tourism is just a way to offset some of the costs of protected areas that were protected for the general good. I think I should stop here, or do I finish my argument?
No, go ahead. Please go ahead.
So trophy hunting areas were created so that trophy hunting could protect those areas. It's on trophy hunting to make it profitable and to make it for the benefit of wildlife. And if it doesn't, then it's not for any other party to they have to prove themselves. That does not put an extra obligation on photographic or other forms of tourism to increase their performance.
Thanks for that. I think this next question, Hans, is a little bit related. So I'm going to give it to you in addition to the one that you just answered, because it gets at the distinction between different countries and different performance. So why speak of Africa as a country and as if wildlife lives in one big herd or pride? Surely if trophy hunting works in one country and not in another, these need to be separated as separate circumstances. Obviously, what this question is getting at is, what is a blanket ban about if one country does not seem to be having a negative impact, another country doesn't seem to be advancing conservation? Why would you use a single tool against multiple countries? Over to you.
I think you were alternating, so I think it's Amy's turn.
Well, I'm giving it to you first, just because it was directed at you. So,
okay. Well,
but if you want Amy to go first, I'm very happy to give it to Amy first. Would you like her to go first? We're open here. I'll let Amy go first if you want. Amy, go for it.
Sorry, Holly, mine glitched out for a second there. Could you just very quickly repeat that to the middle part?
Yeah, sure. I mean, basically what it's getting at is why use a single tool against multiple countries if actually performance is different in the different countries, circumstances are different, and perhaps countries can demonstrate different degrees of success or failure.
No, absolutely. I mean, from my point of view, there's over 200 scientists and community members have signed this bill suggesting that if there is a this open letter suggesting that if there is a UK import ban, that it should be a smart one. And that would reflect exactly the complexities you're talking about. So saying that these things do differ, whether you've got a lion import from Booby Valley Conservancy or you've got, I don't know, a reindeer import, they can have different contexts, and those different contexts should be reflected. And I think we know that these topics are nuanced. And so it seems fair to have a nuanced tool that is appropriate then for judging that. And I think that's why we want more complexity rather than these kinds of blanket things and just saying because it's threatened or endangered, regardless of the causes of those threats and how trophy hunting either exacerbates or reduces that we'll have the same answer all the time. So I would like to see, both in location and species, more variation in and just sort of nuance about how those policies are made.
Over to you, Hans.
Well, I think I did exactly that. I painted 2 countries green, and I said this policy will have very limited, if at all, impacts on those 2 countries. You have to differentiate between countries, and I'm doing that.
So, okay, so you're happy with the extent of your reply on that. I'm not going to get into the debate, so I could differentiate the question, but I'm sure all my friends know I'm really behaving well here today. So okay, this one is for Amy, but of course, Hans, anybody can start, but I think it's very much getting at a point that Amy made, so she probably has to defend the point somewhere. So you made the comment, Amy, that more lions are protected by trophy hunting areas than other areas. And the question is, do you have the verified population statistics to back that up, or did you actually mean more lion habitat was protected?
Sorry, so it's more lion range, not more lion numbers. We don't have good data on a lot of lion populations. I think Hans and I will 100% agree on that. It's just we have very little good data, and the data that does come tends to be the most well-monitored populations, often in places like national parks. So, and it is, for me in particular, it's much more about habitats. We see that lion numbers are depressed in many of the extents to which they occur. We did a paper on this showing that, interestingly, in both photographic areas and trophy hunting areas, and in most of them, the lions were at way below 50% of the carrying capacity. So I think, I haven't got the figures in front of me right now, but there was a clear sort of depression of what could be maintained there. And that comes down to things like a lack of revenue for those protected areas, both trophy hunting and tourism areas, that is so neither of them really are paying their way. And I think this is back to something that Hans had touched on, that's saying, well, trophy hunting doesn't pay its way, but neither does phototourism. And so I do think we've got to kind of even up the balance here and say, look, these are species that, yes, we don't know the exact numbers of, but we do know their habitat is so important, not just for lions, but for other species as well. And if the international community decides that that is a valuable asset internationally, then we do need, I think, have some responsibility to back that up. So yes, it was about the habitat, and I think it's about much more than lions as well, though.
Thanks, Amy. I mean, a comment was made here about conservation depending on charity. And, I think this is a big question for all of us. I mean, charity, where does it begin and where does it end? And when so many things are happening in the world, and even when people are very generous, how much can they be supporting here? Hans, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that. I'm about to wrap up here. You guys can see the comments that are in the chat. There's not many more that are framed directly as questions. But what I do want to offer to the 2 of you is that you would be able to, you've heard the questions that you were asked. You had your own opportunity. I do want to give the opportunity to you to add any further points that you wish to. And I'm going to use the debating rules. So I'm going to go back to Amy with that, Hans, so that you can be the end person because you are the proponent in favor of the motion. So Amy, over to you. If there's any other things you want to add to it, and Hans, then I'll come back to you and then we'll be wrapping up.
I mean, just to wrap up, I think that what we all want here, and including all the people who are probably pushing for bans, is that we want effective, equitable conservation. That's what we all want here. And I think the ban does not advance that. It doesn't sort of add the complexity, it doesn't add the nuance. And I don't understand why we give this scrutiny towards trophy hunting areas when we don't give the same scrutiny towards phototourism areas. If we decide that a land use should be certified as good or bad, depending on either how well wildlife is doing in it, how much community revenue, then I think that should be applied across the board for any wildlife-based land use. And I feel this fixation on trophy hunting is much more driven by the fact that people hate the activity of hunting, as I do. I'm not a hunter, but than about the actual impacts of it. And I think it would be really good, as we've tried to do here, and I think we've done very well, is to take that emotion out of it and that sort of intrinsic response, and really try to look back and say, what do we need for conservation going forward? And I truly believe that for conservation going forward, We need it to be much more evidence-based. We need it to be much more inclusive and respectful of different views on this, and then try to come up with new forms of funding so that we can move forward with it. And hopefully that will be the way that we start to move forward in the future. And I think Hans and I, we worked really well together. We're actively working on this, and I think there is a bright future ahead if we focus on those kinds of things.
Thanks very much, Amy. And Hans, over to you for the last word.
Well, I think I knew where you wanted to go 2 minutes ago, but I can't go there in 1 minute. And I think that is true for this entire debate. This debate is 1 hour, and people, you can talk about this forever, and some people do. And this is my first debate and probably my last, because I don't think this is what we should be focusing our energies on. This is not going to bring this is not going to help conservation of lions forward very much. UK takes its decision, very few consequences, move on. What I would like to say as a closing remark, I promised I will not go into ethics. I just want to point out that photographic tourism does not have to justify the benefits in the same way that trophy hunting does. Trophy hunting's claim is that it makes benefits and protects wildlife, and that is the justification for killing animals. And that it doesn't do, in my view. Thank you.
Okay, so Hans and Amy, I probably was nodding along with both of you as points were being made. I've found this myself quite enjoyable, but taking on board your point very much so, Hans, which is a debate is a debate. And this one could run into becoming a sterile one if it hasn't already, but I think you guys brought it to life for us. And I think that was really great. And, I hope I've done my job in keeping the balance for the two of you. I found myself, making myself a lot of notes, which I probably will bring up to the two of you at some other point in time. So now what we want to do is we're going to, repeat the poll that we did at the beginning in the standard debating way. And Hans, just to say to you, I wouldn't give up on debating. I think you both are great debaters, and it's all pretty enjoyable overall. So if we team could have the next poll up and just see where we stand on people's position. Having heard that, I think, Sue, you're going to plan on putting the previous one up after that for comparative purposes.
Yeah, we'll leave this open for 1 more minute, and then we will display the first poll's results, and then we will display this one's afterwards.
Yeah, I see that there are 120 something of 176, 70% participation. I mean, it'd be great to get as many of you as possible, because this is the reward back for these folks who put their wonderful time and energy into this, which is, what did you think? So Stu, we're going to leave it for that last minute, or where are we at?
Yeah, when I'm just watching my thing, when it changes to 59 minutes, then we will end the poll.
I see we're getting a lot of comments from the chat, so everyone will be wanting to pay attention to those, and I'll close with just some next steps from our side after looking at the poll.
Thanks. Benedicta, can we end this poll and display poll 1, please?
I just want to make sure that we capture those.
Yeah, we will save them.
Will you have both up though? I want to play that back to the team.
So this was the first poll's results. So they should be showing for everyone now.
And I will just repeat what we just heard, which is the second poll is 29% for, 62% against, and 9% I'm not sure. So we had a movement in the I'm not sures, and we see pretty much where that went, because fewer of them came off of the yeses and more of them went on to the noes. So, a debate is a debate. And as everyone knows, this thing can go on forever, has gone on forever. And when the next country after the UK may go for another such action, this whole debate will start all over again. So we want to find solutions for conservation. And that is what drives all of us, because we're all driven by the passion of our chosen walk of life, which isn't rewarded in so many ways, and which isn't going so well. So I do think that there's quite a panic in the world now, and as there should be and should have been for a long time, which is to find solutions. And I think it's very, very important for all of us to be thinking in that realm. And even though we threw the two of you into the lion pit and you agreed to go, we really want you to be spending all your time doing the fabulous work that you'd both do in the field. So just to let participants know, we will be planning on putting out a short summary. ALU will be doing that of the debating points, and the recording will be made available. I know I've been asked by many people already, so that will be up to ALU. They are planning, of course, to continue their series, and I'll see how Sue's feeling, because she chose the tough thing to start with, which is a particular strategy. So we all have strategies. We have strategies with our life, and we have strategies with conservation, and we're all trying to grapple with what the world is throwing at us. And I wish both of you great success in your work, and to all the people, 167, who pretty much stuck it for the whole time. It didn't vary very much. It was well over 170. Thank you for joining in. And I believe that I'm able to bring this back to you now. Sue, I know you're not taking over, but we're 1 minute over, and Sue asked me to wrap up. And so I think we've done a pretty good job, even though 1 hour is not enough time for anyone to debate. So thank you both for your wonderful efforts, and we'll all be in touch. Good luck, everyone, and thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Holly. Sue, Hans, bye.